Hi folks, and welcome to Philosophy According to Eddie. And we're going to be looking at religious philosophy with this one, first in the series. We're looking at St. Augustine and human nature. Now, St. Augustine has come up before and will come up again later on in the video series. St. Augustine addresses the idea of human nature from a Christian point of view, and Reinhold Niebuhr agrees with him. However, Freud, Dawkins and Steven Pinker all disagree with him. We will be looking at Genesis 1-3, Romans 7:15, Romans 5:12 and Romans 7:24 to back up what we are looking at. So this idea of human nature then, what is it? It's a very good question because sometimes humans seem to be inherently good, sometimes they seem to be inherently bad. Rousseau believed that humans were essentially good. By essentially, I mean it's in their essence, in their being. Their essence is good, it's just that they do bad things. Thomas Hobbes, however, believed that humans were essentially bad, brutish animals. St. Augustine believed that we were born sinful due to the fall of humanity. See the philosophy video on that one. But that we are capable of redemption. And a lot of these ideas come from his life and his life experience. As was illustrated in the religious experience video, Augustine had a conversion experience to Christianity. He was a very intelligent young man and went through various ideas, including Manichaeism, and these were unsatisfying for him. Before his conversion, he tried Manichaeism, which was a form of dualistic religion that didn't really provide Augustine with the answers he was looking for, of a way of life and the religion. Anyway, it was based on the teachings of Mani, which you can look up if you wish, but when confronted with poor answers, particularly by Faustus, who was supposed to be this great leader of the Manichees, but Augustine turned out to be more educated than him, he felt disillusioned and moved away from Manichaeism. So he rejected Manichaeism. He was, however, drawn towards Platonism, the ideas of Plato, and Plato's ideas about the soul and the body being opposites to each other stayed with him throughout his Christian ideas. His early life also provided him with a great source of guilt, and that comes in to his theories about human nature as well. Again, all of this history on Augustine can be found elsewhere. We're going to be looking instead at his beliefs about human nature. He was also anti-Pelagian. Now, the Pelagians believed that morality could be found within us without the need for religious scriptures or religion, and Augustine was dead opposed to that. He thought religion was very important and that we needed religion, we needed scriptures such as the Bible in order to actually redeem ourselves because we are born sinful. Human nature, according to Augustine, is very much linked to the fall of humanity in Genesis 1-3. The idea that we sinned against God when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. Again, see the previous video on St. Augustine for this one. What's suggested is that human will, before the fall of humanity, was that we were willing to be good, willing to be obedient. We wanted to be good. We wanted to be obedient. That's the idea of will. Before the fall of humanity, love was a unity, a combination of cupiditas, or self-love, which means sort of pride in oneself and self-respect, not anything else, and caritas, which is generous love, the love for other people, the love for animals, for nature, and for God, of course. This very much being love for God. Interestingly, Augustine also includes at this point that any kind of sexual relationship, just anything to do with sex basically, is a part of friendship. There is some debate as to whether Adam and Eve were considered to be married at this point, but general acceptance is that they weren't, because there was no need for marriage. They were friends, they were united together, sex was secondary to that, whereas marriage later was required because of what happened to humanity as a result of the fall. Now the fall came about because Eve, in particular, according to Christianity, was proud and disobeyed God. So, disobedient will. Now she was tempted by the serpent, Satan, but this was only a facilitation. The devil didn't cause it, the devil only facilitated it. So it is Eve's fault, although I would argue it takes two to tango, and Adam ate the fruit too. But anyway, there we go. What happened here was that love became divided. The fall of humanity broke love into two, essentially. Into the cupiditas and the caritas, the self-love and the love for God. So the Cu representing cupiditas, Ca representing caritas. Doesn't mean that the heart is made of both copper and calcium. Little chemistry reference there. Anyway, love is divided. It can be put back together. We can love God, we can love ourselves, and we can put them back together, but they will never stay together. It's like the broken heart, like a broken plate. You can sort of put it together and the parts match, but they will never stay together without essentially us being good Christians. The body and the soul are also now divided into the lustful body, which experiences concupiscence. Concupiscence in morality refers to appetites, desires of the soul. Reminding you of Plato, maybe? Whereas, so appetites of the body even, not of the soul, appetites of the body. The soul has no appetites. The soul instead, rather than being lustful and concupiscent, wants to love God. So the body and the soul are pulling apart from each other. Incidentally, again, concupiscence in theology refers to sexual lust. So there's a big emphasis on sexual lust here. So the body is full of appetites, it's lustful, the soul wants to be more like God. So there's that division, like Plato, of the body and soul division. The will is also divided. We've got the will of the soul, which wants continence, i.e. control of the self, and, as Aristotle put it, akrasia. Akrasia being the weakness of the will. Now that's not a word that Augustine used, but it's relevant at this point. It's weakness of will. That's the idea of being weak and giving in to temptation. And all of this leads to original sin, the idea that we are born sinners. Sin is transmitted as a result of us being children of Adam and Eve. They sinned, they pass it on, almost like a genetic thing. We are born sinners. And that means we experience a double death. We've already experienced one death, the death of our relationship with God, and then we will experience our bodily death as well. And all of this is because of the fall. Pretty bleak stuff, but help is at hand, according to Augustine, in the form of, God. All of this is redeemed by God and God's grace. We are all predestined to hell because of our original sin. We start far too far away from God. Remember, sin means distance from God. So we start a long way from God, but God is willing to forgive. If we work towards God, God will forgive and generously allow us to come back to him, back to heaven, even though we do not deserve it, according to Augustine. We've got the free will to choose, he's given us the free will to make the right decisions, and if we make all the right decisions, he will generously forgive us and allow us into heaven. Thank you, God. Modern interpretations of original sin and of the fall of humanity have called Augustine's approach into question. Now, Augustine has been very, very influential, particularly on the Catholic Church, but there's a lot of arguments suggesting that actually he's created a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, particularly around sex, and also a lot of violence as part of his teaching on Christianity. So, looking at the fall and of original sin in itself, there are three reinterpretations. One is that it is symbolic. This carries on from the Jewish tradition, which suggests that actually this is not about a physical body and soul, which are separated. It's more a symbolism of the spiritual journey to be more like God. We're not born sinners. And that's a very good thing in terms of human nature, because it suggests we're not inherently evil. Think about the problems with that. Suggesting people are inherently evil, surely that's going to lead to people being able to pass the blame on for their own actions, for their violence and for their hatred. So it could be seen as more of a symbolic thing, which can then be interpreted. Dawkins, unsurprisingly, is not a fan of this, and will go further and suggest that it is irrational and dangerous to suggest that we are born sinners. It brings about guilt, it brings about shame, it brings about people wanting to convert people to Christianity, and if they won't convert, potentially killing them off because they are heretics, because they are not worthy of God. It leads to all of these bad human actions. And he suggests the best thing to do is just get rid of religion altogether, but he particularly doesn't like this teaching. Steven Pinker kind of agrees, but maybe a little bit less dogmatic about it, suggesting that actually Christianity has become irrelevant. The violence and the guilt and shame of Christianity can be replaced if we take on board the humanitarian principle, the idea that if we all look out for each other's well-being and are good to each other, then the best of humanity flourishes. We just don't need Christianity anymore. When it comes to the idea of sin and our responsibility for our actions and our free will, Reinhold Niebuhr is actually in favour of this idea, sort of moves Augustine along and suggests that actually we need to remember the fall of humanity as a reminder that we are responsible for our actions, that we are responsible for evil, and it is only up to us and through us that we can show responsibility for others in our community and in our world. If we take the approach that we are not responsible for our sin, it could lead us to a logical conclusion that we're not responsible for others. We don't need to be good because God will always look favourably on us. But actually, the fall of humanity is a good reminder that there are big global problems that need us to take responsibility for each other and to look after each other. This, however, does lead us to the question about, sort of, well, how about that original idea of original sin? And Niebuhr talks about the idea that original sin is inevitable as an idea, but it's not necessary. We do not need to have this sin and these ideas. Sin is apparent in both good acts and in bad acts as well. It's like a good act will bring us closer to God, a bad act will move us away from God, but we never reach God, so there's always sin, and we've got to bear that all in mind. And at an individual level, good people may still do good things, but when they act as a group, they may well not. And that, again, suggests that actually there is some inherent bad within us. So all of those things together suggest original sin and the fall of humanity is still important, but it is important as well to see it as a way of improving humanity in general. Finally, this seeming obsession with sex naturally brings Freud into it. Freudian analysis, very much related to sex and sexuality. And Freud suggests that actually psychoanalysis is a much better tool for understanding sexual guilt and shame, and that actually all of these ideas of sexual guilt and shame, which come from the idea that somehow sex is evil and wrong, come from this idea of original sin, because it is through sex that original sin is passed on. So it's therefore an inherently bad thing. And he just says this isn't healthy. Humans are built with a libido. They're built with a sex drive for a reason, and that we shouldn't see that as a guilty, evil thing. Again, Dawkins would back this up, suggesting that as biological creatures, it's part of us, we shouldn't shy away from it, we should embrace it. In a responsible way, of course, but that we shouldn't feel guilty for it. All of these reinterpretations are valid reapproaches to Augustine, whether they are in favour, like Niebuhr, or against, with Dawkins, Pinker, Freud, and the Jewish tradition. So there you have it. We've now looked at St. Augustine and how he came to his very influential ideas about how humanity was good and obedient before the fall, and after the fall became broken, and that's what's caused human nature, the divided will, the seeming good and bad within humanity. We've also looked at how that's been reinterpreted and how that has affected Christianity in general. So, of course, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you next time.